Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. RoK is certainly a controversial figure in both Gamergate and the broader internet community at large. Many people find his views on women to be downright disgusting and disturbing. Mad Max is one of my favourite film franchises of all time, especially considering its impact on one of my favourite game series of all time. What do these two things have to do with each other? Well, that's what I'm here to talk about. Now, first off, I should mention that this story came to me via the way of my friend the Femotheist, whose article on the way the press tried to conjure controversy out of thin air is down below. My approach, though, in this instance will be very different. I'm here to talk about the pervasive problems within journalism, not the lack of honesty of internet feminists. So if you're going to misinterpret what I'm trying to say in this video in one way or another, might I suggest that you just take this bag of building blocks and bugger off into the corner while the adults talk. So the story I'm here to dissect centers around the release of the new movie Mad Max Fury Road. In particular, the story goes that the movie has in some way offended men's rights activists who are now calling for a boycott of the film, i.e. there's been a men's rights activist backlash with pitchforks and torches against the movie because of the film's alleged feminist themes. Now, the problems with the story, which totally discredits it as any form of recognizable journalism, are threefold, and so I shall look at each of these three problems in turn and illustrate how they wreck the credibility of the narrative put forth by the media. So the first problem with the story is that it makes an extraordinary claim, but it has only one source to back that claim. Now, you might imagine that a backlash and a boycott would entail some form of organized effort, maybe a hashtag, maybe a petition orchestrated by men's rights activists, something like this. The problem is that none of that exists. The only source for the purported backlash is a single blog entry on the website Return of Kings, and that is literally the only source they have. Now, this carries with it all of the inherent problems of one-source journalism. Down below is a bunch of sourcing guidelines from organizations ranging from Reuters to the Associated Press, as well as some very well written articles critiquing the sourcing of modern online journalism. The main problem with articles such as this is that they are weak and lack credibility. There is no additional citation to back up the fact that there was indeed any sort of major backlash or any sort of major boycott. None. And so the story lacks credibility straight out of the gate. And no, the comment section of the article in question does not count as a separate source. Neither does an obviously biased blog post by David Futrell. One-source journalism also introduces bias because with no secondary verification of anything, the journalists could just literally write whatever the hell they want based on that source. There is no other side of the story, just whatever the hell the journalists want to put forth. The point is that this type of reporting is generally widely decried by journalism industry professionals, and it's generally a formula for weak and lazy reporting. The second problem with the story is of course that it is fundamentally inaccurate in a number of ways. The author of the piece, Clarey, and the blog Return of Kings are both in no way affiliated with the men's rights movement in any way. This isn't something to be discussed, this isn't something that's debatable, it's a fact. RoK, the owner of the site, has stated so numerous times and even got into a Twitter exchange with a Forbes journalist who was insisting that the site was a men's rights site, regardless of what RoK said. I guess that journalists now get to just make up facts and tell sources which group the sources are associated with, whether or not the source agrees or not. Such professionalism. There are of course also a few other sources that show that Return of Kings is clearly an alternative right masculinist site, whatever that means. For example, the site's description and some articles have run critical of the men's rights movement, both which illustrate that they are not a men's rights site, both of which are also linked down below. So, Return of Kings is not a men's rights site, then what about Clarey, the author of the piece? Well, he's not an MRA, he's an economist and blogger, and he says as much himself in a video about the incident down below. I don't know why his word would have to be called into question on this. You don't get to decide what he is, he clearly states he's got nothing to do with the men's rights movement. Of course, none of this information right here was worth presenting as sources, and they didn't even do basic fact-checking into who they were talking about. These news articles just still make this disingenuous and inaccurate claim that these guys were men's rights activists to this very day. Anyway, the point is that these inaccuracies, deliberate or not, further erode the credibility of a story which had very little to begin with. Now, the third and most obvious problem, at least in my opinion, with this one source story which contains massive inaccuracies, is that it is simply not newsworthy in any way, at least not in the usual method of determining such things. All this is people writing articles to tell you that someone else wrote a blog post that they disagree with. Oh, and some other people commented on the blog post, and that's literally it. Newsflash, some guy wrote a blog post. Everybody panic. What impact could his blog post possibly have besides a handful of his readers deciding not to see the movie? How is that news? How is the single blog post important enough to get 250 articles on major news sites written about it? Is Aaron Clarey just really that important? At the end of the day, that's all I have to say about this story. There isn't very much to it. Is this story and the way it was handled indicative of a systematic pro-feminism bias in the online press? Well, that's not really mine to decide. That's something people can make up their own minds on. However, at the end of the day, bad journalism is bad journalism, and this is just another case of biased, sloppy online reporting that merited a look. So, I have a much longer, much better video in the editing room. I'm Dangerous Analysis. Thank you guys for subscribing, and as always,
good night and good luck.